Hi, I'm Rachael Rakes. I'm the Curator of Public Practice for Bach. This is the first in a series of videos where we mix artist talks, studio visits, and conversation about present urgencies. In this case, we're launching this alongside a current focus for our blog Prospections of tactical solidarities. The idea behind tactical solidarities is to rethink tactical solidarities for this moment alongside a range of artists and other practitioners in terms of these times of closed borders, physical distancing, pandemics, and all kinds of other potential and ongoing fascisms. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Wendelien van Oldenborgh. We wanted to bring Wendelien along to start this out because we find that her work, which is intensively collaborative, which rethinks histories and revises them, and which injects all kinds of new imaginaries into the present. We wanted to think about her work as a way in its own of practicing solidarity. The way that this will work is we will talk through a few recent works and look at some clips, and then kind of broaden the conversation from there. So without further ado, Wendelien, we'll start with you. And I think the first work we're going to get into is Two Stones. Maybe we can start off by talking a little bit about the theme of tactical solidarities and the work Two Stones, and we'll look at some clips.
Hi, Rachael. It's nice to see you, and thank you for inviting me on this platform. It's a great honor, of course, to be the first one in such a series and to be thinking along with you and with Bach on these themes, and to be thinking how my works relate to that as well, I would say. So yes, Two Stones is a film that I made, that I finished last year, and I actually did a lot of the research for it during my Bach fellowship, which was 2017 to 2018. And then also, it's maybe nice to say that the themes in, or what I focused on in Two Stones also came out of the work that I did for the Dutch Pavilion in the Biennial in Venice, because I was already looking at this, and actually did both the figures that are introduced in the film, which are Hermine Huiswoud and Lotte Stambeze, were already there in Cinema Hollanda. I filmed the film then also in Pendrecht, which is Lotte Stambeze's area of Rotterdam. And Hermine Huiswoud came in through the history of actually some kind of activism that is and political attitudes from past positions in the Netherlands that are hardly seen. So maybe to quickly introduce the piece, I found that there were some interesting connections that I wanted to make between things that were maybe we could even, they're kind of seemingly unrelated themes, which in this case were really architecture and communism, feminist and class and race issues. And so through these two figures, I saw that all these things were present. Maybe I should quickly explain who they are. Hermine Huiswoud was, she was an activist and politically very active person and a writer. She, with her husband Otto Huiswoud, edited the magazine The Negro Worker, which was, it was actually a publication of I'm going to say this slightly wrong, but it was like a workers' union type, like a black workers' union organization. The precise name escapes me right now. Organized also from the Comintern as a source. Hermine Huiswoud grew up in the US and related also there to a group of African Americans who became communists. And a lot of, it was actually a surprise to me to learn that a lot of women were involved in that, and they were committed to help the new Soviet Union to build up, and went to the Soviet Union. So she's one of these women that really belong to that history that also has a kind of a further curve into a present into Black feminism and so on. It's a very, very interesting line. Legacy, let's say. And so she also ended up in the Netherlands because she was the partner of Otto Huiswoud, who was a subject of Suriname and had a Dutch passport. And eventually, I mean, there's a whole history to this that is becoming much more known now, and ended up in the 50s in the Netherlands. And exactly this trajectory that I now said, like Hermine Huishout was in Moscow in the 1930s, she was in the Netherlands in the 1950s, and then stayed there actually until she passed away in the late 90s. And Lotte Stambeze, who is an architect who was trained at Bauhaus, she was the first female student of the building department, the architecture department, which was then led by Hannes Meyer. She happened to be also the lover of Hannes Meyer. This has a very own dynamic, and I think it's very much part of the story, but I don't focus on it. And she was admitted to his class as a first woman. Then actually she was thrown out of the school actually because she was the lover of Hannes Meyer. He was not yet stopped to be at the school, but she was. Then she made a trajectory through Europe, ended up in mostly in Czechia. She worked always with these modernist, internationalists, architects, and eventually had this dilemma also where to work. By then she had a child, which was Hannes Meyer's child, was a single mother, didn't get work anymore. And for that reason, and also because there was really a choice at the time between communism or fascism. So she was definitely a socialist. She was actually politically active in Czechia as well. Then she moved to Kharkiv and looked for work there. Kharkiv was at the time the capital of Soviet Ukraine, and there was a lot of building work going on because they were developing industrially. There were many factories being built, and this one group that she joined was building a huge neighborhood around a tractor factory called GTZ. And this GTZ area became, so there was a whole plan actually that she and the group developed in the 1930s, but only one tiny part, I think an eighth or something of the whole plan was being realized, because by that time Stalin came to power and actually stopped all of the modernist tradition there. But this area still exists, and yeah, so my trajectory then was that I wanted to look at these two women. I wanted to look at these two locations, which was Kharkiv, GTZ, and Pendrecht. Pendrecht being an outskirt of Rotterdam that was built in the time that Lotte Stambeze came to the Netherlands, which I forgot to tell you, but she, after her Soviet experience, she did some more work in the Soviets together with Mart Stam, and then they together came to the Netherlands. So she lived in the Netherlands since 1934, more or less. But after the war, in 1946, she got the task to be the municipal architect, so the head architect of the municipal department of architecture and city development. And that was really a rebuilding commission, because Rotterdam was bombed in the war and flattened, as we probably all know. So she was in this redevelopment moment, had to redevelop Rotterdam, and they expanded, of course, in the outskirts. So she started with this plan for Pendrecht already in the late 40s. It was also actually proposed in Siam. She was a member of Siam. She was in that sense, you can also see how internationally related she was, and also how ambitious she was. And so this plan was proposed there. Siam is, of course, the Conférence Internationale de Architecture Moderne, very important throughout the 20th century as a motor for a lot of modernist architecture. And it was also, the plan was executed, opened in the late 50s, celebrated by architects and interested alike at the time. So I chose that place, Pendrecht and Kharkiv, to have the two locations. There's another set of twos that I kind of piled onto each other, because we also have these two moments, the 1930s, the 1950s, and then I all bring it to the now by how I work, actually, because I always work with people that are kind of living now in any case, and then they are connected to all these issues. So that's also how I bring these themes maybe a bit into activity, or they get activated through actual people that are connected to these moments and to these issues. So in Kharkiv, I worked with people from there, but I also took some people over to Kharkiv and vice versa. We invited Zhenya Gubkina to come to Pendrecht for the shoot in Pendrecht. So we have a slightly mix in each location, but mainly people from Kharkiv in Kharkiv and mainly people from Rotterdam in Rotterdam, or from the Netherlands at least. And I thought maybe we should just play a little clip, and then we can talk more about it. This first clip that that actually we kind of both chose together is slightly longish, like 2.5 minutes, but it has 2 quotations in it. One is a reading out of a text by Hannah Dawn Henderson that is her own text. Hannah Dawn Henderson is one of the participants, but one of the protagonists. And she's an artist and a writer. And she published this book in 2017, Being in a State of Erasure, which I heard being launched and I thought was amazing. And somehow we kind of decided that it found its place into the recordings. It was, I mean, you'll see why. So she first reads that, and then after that you see a text being read out that was a text by Hermina Huiswoud from a bit later in the century, read out by Ola Hassanein, and Ola is also one of the protagonists. Ola Hassanein was one of my colleagues in BAC Fellowship, actually. She's also an artist and an architect. Yeah, I think that's maybe what we should say before we see it. I will go straight to that by sharing the screen. I'm trying to find it.
These words, as I read them to myself in my mind, are echoes traversing the distance of continents and time, of maroons, of Nani, of bodies bound in chains at the shores of Gorée, of lungs lacerated by the lament of no more return. These echoes tremble in the curve of my lip as they do of those of my brother, of my cousins, as they will in those of my child, passing through the body that is my generation and extending beyond into a future we will never witness. These echoes are the reverberation of a cry of protest. It is a cry that shouts, I am my author, and you will never claim my language. You will never know my language. It is a territory you will never locate.
Today, officially, reactionary Rotterdam. Tomorrow, unofficially, all Netherlands. We'll introduce percentages. So this is a text by Hermina Huiswoud. And it's titled, Only 5% Surinamese, Antillians and Foreign Workers Allowed. News item, Friday 29th of September 1972. The Rotterdam Municipal Council decided to limit residents of Surinamers, Antillians, and foreigners in the different Rotterdam districts to 5% of the present population as of today.
Net als wat ik toen hoorde, wist ik niet. Dan woonde er dus echt, laten we zeggen, 1 Surinamer mocht er dan wonen. En dan zag je 1 Turk of 1 Marokkaan. Laat ik zeggen, van het traphuis. Ik ben in het traphuis begonnen. Mijn zus en ik wilden naast elkaar wonen, maar dat mocht niet. Want je mag niet met 2 Surinamers in één portiek wonen.
I thought to extend it a bit. We also heard Jolanda Renvorm, who is a resident of Pendrecht. And by her story, we see how this rule that Hermina Huiswoud was agitating against was affecting people directly. That was just one of the reasons I was, like, all of us didn't really know about this, but it was incredible racist policies that were going on in the 70s that, like, to me, it also always kind of shocks me because we always think back of the 70s as the time that Netherlands was very left-wing and politically, like, quite a place of admiration somehow, and these things were there. So that's always an interesting, I always find it interesting surprises to bring to light how we just didn't, this awareness didn't stay, or it wasn't there, maybe, who knows. I actually thought maybe we could play another clip directly, which is more related to how, we'll see. Actually, maybe I just play it and we can have a little conversation about it. I have to first put the time. So I can now go to the share screen. It's in the right moment.
My great-grandmothers, they were really very bold feminists. But for example, all other generations in my family, our women, they were not so interested in theory. They were not so interested in political life because maybe of the trauma of repression, trauma of wars, of huge famine. In 1933, exactly here, it was so-called Голодомор. And a lot of people died in 1933. It was a very dark period in the history of Ukraine. What was the awful thing that have quite good theory of Soviet feminism? It wasn't a question here because basic rights, human rights, exactly here, exactly in this place, were totally violated. Sometimes it was the same hypocrisy that from one side it was declaration about equal rights, from other side they did nothing for that or even didn't want equal rights.
Yeah, well, it was kind of came to my mind when we were talking about to have an ethos whereby it's about political, like to enact something, action, as opposed to mere rhetoric, like declarations that don't actually manifest a difference. So this is where it came to my mind that before Hermina went to the Soviet Union, she initiated an organization called the Harlem Tenants League. And what's also quite defining about the Harlem Tenants League is that actually the majority of the people who were active within it were actually women. And that was largely because they obviously they were faced with the reality of these kind of housing situations. So this, I think, is like an example of whereby it's not just a question of declarations and rhetoric, it's actually manifesting a certain action, a certain type of protest.
I found that a nice moment because it talks so much about the difference also between manifesting something and saying it's going to be like that and actually doing action and making sure that something is going to change and also not only making sure, like being in such a situation that you cannot do anything else but make an action that things are changing. And this was, of course, we hear Zhenya Gubkina, who is an activist, and she's an architect historian, and an activist, also a feminist activist in Ukraine. And so from her history, she tells about how these rules were implemented and how they were imposed. Like there's no more sexism, there's no more racism, but as like rules that are imposed. And I like what Hannah brings in as a kind of a counter position of where actually we need action. We need kind of people acting out political positions and not just saying, oh, this is how it's going to be. So I found that really nice, sort of two nice positions. Also, it's like two different histories, obviously. It's not like they came from different histories. So there's a difference in that. But I found it really nice how these differences and overlapping positions were rubbing up against each other in these conversations. What you see is filmed in Ukraine in an apartment of one of the, so it's in that estate, in that housing complex that Lotte Stambeze helped designing. And we're in an apartment of one of the residents there, who you also see making the tea.
I wonder if this is a good moment to maybe turn to Prologue, Squat, AntiSquat, thinking about the all of these overlapping themes of architecture, housing, racism, the 70s in the Dutch context.
Yeah.
And also what especially you were just saying about these kind of two different kinds of political imaginaries.
Yeah.
You know, acting as things are as they should be, but then continuing to push them, I think, is an interesting dynamic in this work as well.
Mm.
So
yeah, I prepared. I mean, I thought maybe it's interesting to have to begin with an introduction of like the work. Well, maybe I should say something about the work. Actually, Prologue, Squat, AntiSquat was a work that was started and like, let's say, premiered in a project, another project that was called a project by Vivian Zihal called Frontier Imaginaries. That I made it for that, but it also showed in the Dutch pavilion, and it has essentially two sides. It's an installation, and it has two screens with two parts of the same, like, interweaving of different themes. And in this case, I concentrated on this, particularly actually on the squatting action in the 70s by this Dutch Caribbean community. I was out of necessity because of the racist rules that were put out then, which is actually completely connected to what the quote that we just heard from Hermine Huiswoud, because it's the same time Amsterdam also closed itself down for any, like, certain areas were completely not available for Black people to live in, to rent anything. And we had there was a large influx of migration from particularly Suriname, which was about to become independent. And there was a terrible housing policy going on with people being housed in pensions under terrible conditions. And these flats in the Bijlmer, so because the squat took place in the Bijlmer, which was newly built, it was newly opened, let's say. And they were standing empty. Nobody was renting there. They were standing there, and they were actually cheaper, if you would even think about it, like in terms of money, what the government would spend on these pensions, or they're not called pensions, boarding houses. The people were housed in boarding houses. And that was with a huge amount of money attached to it. If you put that money into a flat in the Bijlmer, it was like easy. Like, it could have been, so it was cheaper, would have been cheaper for the government to house everybody there, but they didn't. And so the squatting action was really to push to get proper housing. And this went on for years, actually, and eventually there were 150 flats squatted. It's a huge action that, to my surprise, was also something that fell away completely in the history of squatting of Amsterdam. And there is a lot of history writing on squatting, and squatting Amsterdam is like it's like a city image even. It's completely there, but this particular squatting action was very invisible. Although at the time there was a lot of solidarity by the white squatters as well, which is great to see. Actually, in some of the clips you see maybe the poster behind, because they did actions like the Nieuwmarkt squatters were walking in the Bijlmer with big banners saying Nieuwmarkt Solidair and so on. So there was definitely solidarity. Somehow it just fell away in the history telling. Mm. What I wanted to show is first the introduction of part 2. So just because then all the names come of the people, you see a little bit how the thing is set up. I think it will give an idea.
Het klimaat wat neergezet wordt, dat het allemaal geen zin heeft om acties te voeren. Ja, ja. Ze straffen de mensen keihard die de straat op gaan, om ze dus te ontmoedigen.
Ja, ik denk dat het voornamelijk ook te maken heeft met het inzien van wat een succes is en de definitie van een succes.
Exact.
Het zijn de kleine successen waardoor je door kan blijven gaan. Ja. Anders dan word je helemaal muurgeslagen. Ja.
Dat zijn diegenen die altijd de plek. Dat zijn diegenen die de macht hebben. Maar wat ik wel bijzonder vind,
Ja, zie je, toen was het ook al.
I forgot to mention, but a very central part of the piece, of course, is that I filmed it in this building, which was designed by Aldo van Eyck, a very late Aldo van Eyck from the 1990s. It's a huge office complex on the edge of Amsterdam. Tripolis, it's called. And what came to my knowledge in the early 2016 was that the group We Are Here had squatted there. They'd been thrown out actually after a couple of weeks already. But the fact alone that these things came together for me was an enormous cue to look into if I could film in that building, because I find it always really interesting when it's actually so iconic culturally for the Netherlands, an Aldo van Eyck building. And then, of course, the squatting by a newly, let's say, group in need that is also using squatting still, even in 2016, when squatting has been made illegal already in 2010, trying to use that method to put themselves out there, to, first of all, of course, to have a roof above their heads, and also to make some pressure and make media attention and get, use it as a tool to for their struggle, basically. And the group We Are Here, I'm sure it's very known by most people, but maybe to explain quickly, it's a group that came together. They're all people without documents that were not allowed to stay as political asylum in the Netherlands, and were thrown out or asked to leave and don't have a place to go. They just can't go back, or they don't have anywhere to go. And so they find themselves in limbo. They had already grouped up in a camp, like a tent camp in the winter. It was a terrible thing, outside of Amsterdam. And from that action and the police wanting to clear out the camp came their first squat in, or actually they were actually allowed to live in a church. And from there on, they've kind of moved through the city, and I think they're still at it. This is an ongoing, drama, I would say. But to bring these things together was one of my aims, so that the kind of ideas around what could squatting do now, or could it do something now, in what situation do we find ourselves. And even this Tripolis building was an interesting place because of its, it was empty, but it was also not empty. So it was empty to squat in one part, but in the other part it had these residents in it that were on an AntiSquat contract. And again, these anti-squat agencies that have sprung up so much everywhere, and even according to Roel Griffioen in the film, it's a Dutch export product. This idea that you can protect property by putting low rent-paying residents in it is spreading. They've marketed it everywhere now. And of course, it's like a hugely successful formula, because the agencies that do that, they get the rent from people that actually do work for them. They protect these buildings against squatting, and at the same time, they get also paid by the owners for protecting the building. I mean, it's a kind of a perverted system, no? I mean, there's a lot to say about that, and some of it what is there to say about it comes into the film also. Yeah, the other thing, well, actually, I would probably just play the second clip, and then I could say a little bit more about the things. Let me just look.
Help jezelf niet mee. Want ik had zoiets van, ja, verdorie, de UvA is wit. Ja, nou, dan ga ik juist daar studeren. Ik wil daar aanwezig zijn. Ik mag er zijn. Misschien is dat omdat ik opgegroeid ben met uitsluiting, discriminatie, racisme, dat ik een beetje een dikke huid had ontwikkeld al. En zoiets had van, je komt er niet mee weg. Weet je zal geconfronteerd worden met mij en je hebt er maar mee te dealen. En in die ontmoeting verander je allebei een beetje. Tenminste, dat hoop ik.
Je moet wennen aan een soort minderheidsrol of zo op de werkvloer.
Ja. Je raakt dat nooit kwijt. Je bent altijd als het ware een soort vertegenwoordiger van al die mensen die op jou lijken in een witte omgeving. Het is echt een bepaald tokenisme.
Zelfs hier.
Ja. Dus dan ik ga dat niet uit de weg. Ja.
There were quite a few things I wanted to mix there. I mean, mix not, but to bring together, which were the kind of the movements and action groups that were going on then when I filmed it, or now we can say, and things that had their foot in the past. So we had the squatting action in the past, and I also invited some other people that were really related to even action groups in the 60s, and also an architect, Lucien Lavour, who even worked with Aldo van Eyck, but was also, to the surprise of his daughter, who is now in a social movement, Gina Lavour. He was involved in movements in the 60s, and she didn't even know that, because there seemed to be also sort of some kind of discontinuity in these stories. But it was very important to see how long these traditions are anyway, and that these things connect. Like there was, for instance, the occupation of the Maagdenhuis is one of the main 1968 events that happened in Holland. But then there was also this occupation of the Maagdenhuis in 2015, and this led to the foundation of the University of Color, which I also bring in somehow. There's some members of the University of Color there, and so on. I mean, these things, I just try to connect them with this earlier event of the squatting action. And I think I'll just play the other clip, and then we can talk a little bit about the other people perhaps who were involved in that.
En wij hebben een gemeente Osso, de maakt Osso naar de. En aan de nieuwe straat, ik ben aboekurs maar toe, die ook bekraakt in Osso. Maar altijd problemen met de gemeente. Ik ben asma die betaald op camera met de intention, als aan de stem. Dus nu, alles wat er nou aan doen, dat hier, de Osso taal zo op. Prep de Osso taal zo op. En pregunta de 50 tension. Ja, me go going to also.
Ben die microfoon? Ja. Kabel. Even het kabel. En Claudia is die broer van Juanita. Dat is Marie Levens, die bij Buitenlandse Zaken. Zij was een van de leidende mensen in de Loosland toen in Amsterdam. Huh?
Ik wist nooit dat er een kraakbeweging was in Zuidoost. Ja. Dat bijvoorbeeld Surinamers ook hebben zitten kraken in de jaren, volgens mij 80. Maar ik weet niet zeker of dat de juiste jaren 70.
Wist ik ook niet.
Ik wist dat nooit. Nee. Ik zelf ben ook opgegroeid met het idee van een stereotype kraken. Ja.
Ik snap niet waarom dit niet de boeken ingaat als van, kijk wat we toen hebben gepresteerd en hoe belangrijk dat nu is. Als je het al over sociale bewegingen hebt, dan is dat nu wat mensen nodig hebben.
Ja. Ik weet niet of mensen nog moeten kraken, want het heeft geen functie meer misschien. Kraken heeft geen functie omdat je misschien direct eruit gezet wordt. Of omdat er een te groot belang is. Huh? Dus dat heeft nu een andere dimensie gekregen. Maar het geval van, ik denk maar steeds, ik schaam me kapot dat wat er gebeurt met vluchtelingen.
We see really sweetly, actually, I mean, I really enjoy that scene when it's a beautiful film we're watching by, it's called The Vrouwen van Suriname, Women of Suriname, by Cineclub Vrijheidsfilms. And there was this one woman who was followed in the film, who was one of the squatters in the Bijlmer at the time. And so we're watching that part. And I had invited two members of or ex-members of an activist movement called the Lozon into the film, André Reder and Juanita Lalji. And then he points out that one of the people in the film is the brother of Juanita. And so there was all these connections. And he says this woman now became, she ended up in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and so on. Like you see the kind of continuation of people that were active at the time.
Yeah.
And Helen Felter, who he says that to, also at the moment of filming, she still worked, where she was part of a group that was also a pressure group for feminist issues in the UN. I mean, she was also still active. And so I found it really beautiful how these things really started to be known. I mean, I was learning like crazy in that situation. And and Gina Lafourde, who is speaking and saying like she's actually studying sociology, and they learned a lot about squatting, but they did not, and they went to the Bijlmer to look at it, but they didn't get any information on the combination of these things. So, I mean, all these things were, I think in Prologue, Squat, AntiSquat, for me, there was a very important moment of the shoot. Like the shoot itself, like this moment where we're all watching the film together and the conversations that came out of that was as important as making the film and to go public with that. That moment, I think for many, like it became a really, really beautiful exchange basically of things that were going on. And André Reder, who was doing the Lozon, we also showed his film. He's a filmmaker and made this film on the boarding, on the terrible situation of the boarding houses at the time. And so that was, again, it had so many extra layers, because then Kees Visser, who's also, he's a squatter now and a strong activist now, he then took up that film, for instance, and showed it somewhere else. And it was these kind of things happened quite easily, because it was just a moment where everybody was starting to, or was connecting to things that they all found interesting, but they were not all yet knowing each other or something like that. I mean, it grew very quickly, obviously, but this was I think it was a very beautiful. For me, the shoot of Squat, AntiSquat was an amazing experience. Yeah.
And this comes out, I guess this is an emblematic example of this, but this seems to come out frequently, where the productions and the collaborations and ensembles you're gathering end up being, just as much exchanges, or maybe ways to produce new knowledge, as well as to sort of work towards this piece of, this piece that you're working.
Exactly. I think that it's a huge important part of the work, because I find that if that doesn't happen, then you're not making the piece somehow. That to me is like I guess also the motivation. And I find it also interesting that you can organize something that is a productive moment, and that is actually the moment. It's like, so you're not calling people together to have exchanges, but you're saying, no, we're making a film actually, and somehow that gives some interesting ground for doing that. I'm still quite committed to that. I find that a very nice, slightly different than other forms of gathering, let's say. Maybe that's
it's helpful when the exchanges are incidental and non-incidental, at the same time.
And they have another motivation, but yet this can come in. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something that pains me enormously right now, because this idea of gathering was so much part of the working method, and pains me. I mean, it's just been a bit of a postponement of gathering, and obviously whatever I would do now in these months coming is not going to be with many people. This was a shoot with many people, but I don't think that's what we're going to do so soon at the moment. That also guides me at the moment. That's what we're living through. And I also wanted to say something now in relation to all the incredible uprisings that are going on right now. I think it just strikes me how this moment is so important to think, like, from our isolated places, of how to work in solidarity with things that are definitely things that we want to be at, we want to help and be with. And I think it's super interesting to see what kind of advices are being thrown around of how we can all be with it without actually being somewhere and doing something physically. I mean, apart from the demonstrations that you can be at. But it's something that's also very much on my mind right now in these days.
Yeah, and very in process and sort of changing minute to minute, which is destabilizing, but also it also gives a certain kind of energy because it's like it feels like something is movable. I wonder if it makes sense from here. What do you think to go to talk a bit about from left to right? Yes, we can kind of go in one of two directions, I guess. If we wanted to talk a bit about Cinema Hollanda and stay on the bits, on the more Dutch context and architecture and stuff, we could do that, or we could move over and start thinking of, go more into the idea of gathering, rioting, the rights to be in public, which is also connected, right?
I think I would choose for the latter, because I think it's exactly that. Also, it was from left to right focused on the London riots of 2011, which are very similar. I mean, of course, they were burning London at the time. I mean, they're very similar images from what we're seeing now happening in the US.
Yeah.
And also the comments are very similar. And it was one of the motivations I had to do that piece, because I was very much disturbed by the idea that it was all the time called, it was described as vandalism and looting and amoral, like morality is sunken below zero. No kid has morality anymore because they can just walk into shops and get things, and they're just into violence. And so that was like how it was perceived, or at least, no, it was maybe not how it was perceived, but it was how it was communicated through the press.
Mm-hmm.
Really, anyway, that really got me. And I thought I really made the piece with that in mind, of like, we need to counter that narrative that is just out there all the time. And so I made this piece in collaboration with the showroom in London, and the showroom is located in this small area, which is it's called Church Street area in some perceptions, and maybe it has other names in other perceptions, but it's, in any case, it's wedged between Regent Park, Paddington, Marylebone, and that are very, very rich areas. And this is a very poor area, very, very poor triangle with housing estates and lots of social housing and poor people, and a lot of problems within that little neighborhood, but also, a particular togetherness. But what is also the case is that in the riots, it was, of course, like a pressure cooker between all these rich areas. So something happened, something exploded there. And that was being mentioned also as being completely out of hand, and that was impossible. Mm-hmm. How could that ever happen? But so the people I was introduced to from the neighborhood, from the area I was introduced to by Emily Pethick from the showroom, had really direct relations to the riots. And also one of them had been imprisoned. It was an incredible story, because he was basically put away on charges of conspiracy that were, let's say, proven through CCTV material. And there were 3 hours of CCTV material on which he's like circled with a green circle. And when you watch it, he's not doing anything against the law. So basically they made the story out of, that's probably why it's conspiracy. They made a story, if you were associating with these people, if you were there at that and that time, you probably did that and that. And that was why he was actually imprisoned. Mm-hmm. Put away, and he was put away for 2 years, did a year. Anyway, he's an amazing musician, a rapper, and had written a song in prison called Conspiracy, which I really enjoyed the song. We decided to make the video clip for the song, and then like to work together with a few other people as well. The really beautiful cast that I could get together. I call it cast, it's a bit unfair even. It's just a group of amazing protagonists, and filmed there in the area. And I filmed there in 3 locations, or also they're all very close together, but one of them is the police station, Paddington Police Station, which is a very daunting and like horrendous presence in that area that had been built in the 70s. It has actually prisons underground that were built originally for terrorist suspects. And then there is the underpass, which is incredible architecture from the 60s, very futuristic actually. And it's called the Joe Strummer Underpass, which is, again, very much to my liking, one of those cultural incidences where a band is connected to a place. And of course, I mean, Joe Strummer and The Clash were from that neighborhood. they were active in the 70s. And again, it kind of makes sense in them being like a riot, how do you say, not a riot band, but they were definitely a protest kind of movement, being punk and like what they were standing for. So I brought that in, and also that was also a time that it was very much a squatting area. There were many squats in that area. And so there was also a moment where that was being processed and maybe reacted to by police at the time, which is the 1970s, late 70s. And then we have the sound studio, the Red Bus Studio, which is a very famous studio in the 70s, 80s, where all of these new wave bands were recording their songs, like Duran Duran, Human League, Culture Club. So it also was like a very significant moment. And so the recordings that we did there were all related to these places in their abstract or their kind of more conceptual perception, which is like the police station was like public life, the state, that kind of subject. And then underground in the underpass is like a space that is public, but inside. So you have this kind of public-private notion. So the most talks in the scenes that I set up in the underpass were really to do with public-private, yeah, how can I say, maybe experiences or perceptions that are, and rioting is one of them. I mean, that was the main focus in the underpass, because protest and riot and going out there is something that I feel is connected to the inside, to your urges and to your rage or whatever, and then you go out and you are together, you're in public. So this I thought was really interesting, how that underpass could sort of lead the way to that. And then the sound studio, we did more the scenes that are more reflective and more like the inner thoughts and like more, yeah, it's more private talks. So that was kind of the reasoning behind the locations there. And a thing that became really important is indeed, what is my role as an artist with a camera to make something there? And it became a real question also because of who I was dealing with. And so one of the scenes that came out of there was something that I will show you right now. Yeah, and then maybe we can talk about it. I just want to say that that what I'm going to show you is from a later adaptation of the work. So I did that last year. I made a second version, which is an LP, or it's not an LP, but it's the form of an LP. I actually wanted to make an LP, but I never got the real chance. But I made it into a structure of an LP, so it's a sound piece. And it has an A side and a B side, and it has tracks. But basically, I did that because I showed it in a show, a large show in Spain, and I wanted to take the image out. I had the urge to not show the image this time. And the image is really beautiful, so I had some kind of trouble, but I felt it was really necessary at a certain moment to take away the faces, take away the images of the people. Anyway, so I'm going to show you the scene. It's the opening scene of the film without image, but just as a piece with a subtitle.
They film me, they film me, they film me, they film me. And there I was seen. They made up a story from all the fragments, and then I was charged. Seen as charged. Now you film me, you film me, you film me. And then you'll make up your story, and then I'll be what? Visible?
Oh yeah, that was a question. What do we do as artists, as filmmakers? Is this something to make people visible, and in which way? I mean, this is I think it's a question that was really legitimate to ask there. And what kind of visibility are we talking about anyway? Because that's also the point in terms of camera, because he was actually charged because he was filmed. So, and I think it is, I mean, it gets more and more of a question, especially when images go into the internet. What is the result? What is the consequence of that? What is this visibility? What is the consequence? And I think it's very current right now, like people's faces. Some people need to show the face, but there's many faces that, you know, they can have actually bad consequences of being there, being somewhere. Anyway, I mean, I thought also it's very good to go into that with that awareness. I didn't stop filming, but I think it's, anyway, the actual scene, let's say, was not exactly at the beginning of our filming. It came up as an issue, like, and then we filmed this a bit later into the shoot. But I think it's an incredibly important question always to ask, what are we in fact doing there? What are we doing there? And yeah, I perpetually ask myself.
Yeah, and no matter what, as a white artist and filmmaker, whatever the level of collaboration is, where if it's still you're the one behind the camera.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
It's your name. Then what is that representation? How is it read? What is that visibility?
And indeed, I mean, it's a question I try and hope to be always in negotiation and in dialogue with that question, and also with the people, obviously, that I'm involved with. It's a negotiation that is ongoing and doesn't find it a very comfortable or very finite position. But at the same time, I think the activity brings us also into, brings the conversation also further into the space, into public space, let's say. Anyway, it's also beautiful that Denise Ferreira de Silva, who is also a protagonist in the film, has been elaborating much on that as well. What is can we work between representation and presentation? I always try, I always think it's not the representation, it's presentation. But, it's not a totally fair game. Indeed, it's not. So I don't know, it's something of course, I think a lot about. I'm not sure if I always act properly on it, but at least it's there. And I find it's always good to put it back into the film, that these questions are there. So that's that. I had some other clips ready where I do show image. So just to announce that, which is not the same type of intensity. That's what I want to say. It has another reasoning behind why I show that. Because here I wanted to show a little bit about how in that particular get-together, a gathering, as we just mentioned, that the film shoot is a gathering in which things are elaborated. And in that one, there was a lot of thought about what is the political, also because of the riots not being described as political, but then what is the political? And I think in this particular part of a conversation, there's a few interesting notions being mentioned and coming out. So that's why I wanted to show it.
Obviously, when the riots did take place, it made a lot of noise and a lot of controversy. But in terms of any dramatic changes and within our society, no. But what they do know now is that if certain things might not go our way, action can take place now. And that might be the only thing that they may fear a bit.
That people can actually
respond now, because they don't expect civilians to respond in such a manner.
I believe the act of what happened in itself was politicized by its nature of being, but I don't believe the motivation was political for a lot of the people.
But it happens, right? It happens everywhere. It happened in Detroit in 1965. It happened in Los Angeles in 1965.
But it's about what happens after.
It happened
There's no change
after.
last
year.
People getting fed up with the way police were treating them, and that's spilling out by people attacking the police. Everyone, it was like their fantasy when people were attacking the police. I was watching it on TV and I was going, this is crazy.
So that is something that it's also seems to
That's
be
the
like
thing as
beyond
well.
us.
It's like nothing happened afterwards. So it spilled out. They pushed it back, and there was no reaction. Like there was no real reaction. There was punishment. There was no reform. There was no dialogue. There was just punishment.
So that was then. Let's hope that things go different now. I mean, there's still a lot of punishment. That's clear.
Yeah, but maybe a little bit of reform, and maybe things like today go to show that these things do add up to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. They are starting to add up, totally. And it's also interesting that she mentions it was Ferguson last year, so it was just 1 year after Ferguson, and now we are where we are now, where things went up, down, and now like massive. And indeed, let's hope that it does lead to at least some shifts. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah. How was it? How was it articulated in that was in Squat AntiSquat about there are small, but there are small lessons or small gains, right? That have.
Yes, exactly. That's what he said. What is it? What is the notion of success?
Yes. Yeah. Small successes or big successes.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very important, I think, also to keep going. I think it's even mentioned by Hannah in Two Stones, when they also have a talk about like to get so demotivated by like Zhenya, who lives in the Ukraine, got very like sad about like going into a brick wall all the time, and she really felt like, is it the same story over and over again? And Hannah replies, and like, but we find the moment to still keep going. We find it, and that these kind of things are really.
I think one key to that that I see in a lot of your work also is the intergenerational aspect. It's always an ensemble to some degree of sometimes hugely intergenerational, and sometimes maybe less so. But there's always this sense of somebody who's been there to witness previous generations, previous eras of struggle and blowback, and so you have this kind of this coextensive thread of, well, yes, it's the same struggle, but then also this coextensive thread of, yes, there's been these improvements or these changes, and you need to have intergenerational conversations to really get that.
Yes, really totally. Yeah, otherwise you think indeed that the things now started, it's a new thing. No. Yeah.
I don't know if it makes sense from here to maybe break away from clips for a minute and talk a little bit about your current work.
Although that's a very hard thing to do.
But to what degree you're comfortable. But I was thinking about, I know that your partners for this current work are going to be two younger people, a couple of young people, for one. But I thought, if you're comfortable, if we could talk a little bit about just some of the themes, as they're fairly urgent at the moment, for how we, at least in the Netherlands context, we talk about identity and relation to certain struggles and things like that. So, if you don't mind introducing the project a little bit, just
a little bit,
because it's in process.
It's in process, and it's very much in struggle, and that always gives because anyway, maybe to begin with, I'm working with young women, or I will be working with them mainly, and I am already in conversation with them. And that was a choice because I really thought it's really, I found it really sweet that I got so confirmed in it now with the protests being mainly very young people. I mean, I hear that from the protests in Rotterdam and Amsterdam, that the age is really between 18 and 30, or the main age. Let's say, I'm sure there are other people, older people as well. But the thing was that sort of confirmed my wishes to work exactly with that generation, because I feel there is a certain, it's become a kind of a world, it's become I feel in that when I talk to people that age, for them it's there, like 100%. All these questions, the struggle of the anti-racism, it's there, it's around them. It's like, it's part of the everyday. And I found it became like something that is, and I think the power is there as well. Like there is a positive experience, not an experience actually, because many people have negative experiences, but there is a positive I guess, desire for life. I mean, that's clear. You're young, you desire for life. I mean, and then indeed, there is, of course, also maybe there must be a certain frustration and anger that things are going the way they're going, and like, how are they going to make a life out of that? So I think this kind of energy that is not any longer in me in the same way. I mean, I can feel these same things, but it's a different, I'm in a different moment in my life. And I find it really interesting to feel that there is that. Anyway, so that's what was the choice to work with young people. But what I wanted to address, and I'm really having, it's a struggle, and I don't want to say too much because you never know what happens with the piece, and then I have said these crazy things. But what I thought to address is the difficulty of the kind of gray zones coming out of colonialism and being in colonialism. Let's just make it clear. I feel that there is a lot of we are still very influenced and very much with the internalized values of colonialism, whatever related to capitalism, colonialism. This complex is still very much with us in lots of our structures, institutional structures, but also our subjectivities. And not for nothing, there is this decolonial movement, and it's a struggle. It's an effort, like, say it that way. But the gray zones in that shift from having the governmental rule over the colonies and going out of that. In the case of Indonesia, there is this very difficult area around the people of Indo-European background who were born in the colonies, out of colonialism, out of the being there of the colonial project, and then of course over centuries growing into a population that has a certain identity, if you like, has a certain makeup and a certain position, although it is a very unclear position, because if you want to talk about it as a group, it has a very class-wise, it would go from down to low, from down to up. There would be many classes being represented there, but yet, anyway, it's a complex history, let's say. And then when the revolution happened in Indonesia, there was you could say they were kicked out, and they were welcomed to the Netherlands. But not, like, there's also an incredible reception of, with humiliation and a lot of trouble. And so that history, which is, I mean, it's really difficult to talk about because you have to choose a specific moment in it, or a specific even incident or person, to be able to say to really do something proper with it. But we can't. It's there, and it's there in our country, and it has been there for a long time, and yet it's very difficult to also give it a place in this whole conversation about racism and anti-racism, and the conversation about oppression and power and humiliation, denigration. In that way, racism and power, and like, where do we really start to talk about it too much? And especially in the light of the new ethno-nationalistic parties and the right-wing presence that is partly led by people coming from this background. So that is these facts just give a very troubled, let's say, area of where I wanted to put attention, but that's why I'm struggling now even with my words, because I think it's super complicated to address it or to approach it in a good way, in a way that we can work through something. Because I mean, I still fantasize that my works are like working through something. They're going to try and work through something. So that's actually maybe all I want to say about it. That I'm looking at it. I'm reading a lot also about the histories that are written around the groups and how things were there. I mean, there's some things that are really interesting to point at, which is partly musical. I mean, that's maybe somewhat lighter and easier to talk about, because there was a moment in the early 20th century when keroncong music became hugely popular, like so popular that the record companies jumped on it and made huge amount of records. And it was part of that global situation where records of mixed musics were really, really popular, like the tango and samba and so on. And especially US and British record companies really went for it. So the keroncong was one of them. And keroncong is a music that already existed for a long time in the 16th, 17th century, came from Portuguese influences in that area, and yeah, existed. It's not very clear what happened in all the time in between, but late 19th century, it came up again. And especially in the Indo-European group, it became the form of expression and the form of cultural expression. The language Malay, which is the lingua franca of the colonies, became the language to sing in, which was not there yet. So you can say people found their voice. It was emancipatory. It was related to a popular theater called Stamboul Theater, which was like a traveling and like really popular as in folk. And from that moment, so that popularity that also sprang over to a lot of white population. They also, love to dance to these records and so on. Then it gets, actually, it's really interesting because the revolution and the independence sort of made that also into a break. And then afterwards, you get different streams. I mean, there's different forms of keroncong still existing in Indonesia, and in the Netherlands, it became something. And so these are also different stories. But yeah, that was something that I found very interesting, because in some ways, it was emancipatory before the revolution and becomes nostalgic after the revolution. So it's a kind of also how music, I mean, it's actually spoken about in From Left to Right also, what kind of role can music, what is music within a political idea of political movement, and also in a revolutionary idea? What is music? And actually, I wanted to even show a small clip. I had it ready from Left to Right, where Mirak speaks about that. I found it really beautiful. Should I still play it, or do you think it's too late?
No, let's go for it.
Ready to record, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay. Let's start.
It's been a little while, I know baby girl's catting. She bouncing up and down, she starts speaking Latin.
It is already political.
It is already political. At the moment, it activates the kids.
I agree with that, but perhaps if I were to phrase it myself, I would maybe think on it slightly differently, and I would be like, it's a political act that happens within the self. So it's self-realization that it is definitely a political act, but in itself, it exists within the self, and to apply that outside of the self then is a different process. We can't just sing our way to a revolution. There might be music to inspire a revolution, or music that's a soundtrack to a revolution, but music on its own, I believe it's got a different power. It works on your emotions and it goes in a different place.
So if we are holding on to Freire's, vision of political pedagogy, and which is one which is not authoritarian, which doesn't believe that anyone has any answers for anything, etc., etc. If we're holding on to it, so, we may be able to also perhaps find ways of doing the political work different than what we did in the 80s and the 90s.
I mean, I let it go a little bit further when Denise speaks even about the way that indeed she thinks back on how they were really early in the film. Also, she talks about how she was active in the 80s and the 90s and really trying to work on this thing of representing yourself, like self-representation, and that would be it. And then she says, but maybe we should still find different ways of doing the political work, which I still find inspiring, because I think we still have to invent ways to do the political work. And maybe this is what this is about as well, this tactical solidarities. Like, we have to invent ways to do the political work, I think.
Yeah, and it's always it's always plural, right? There's not like, we're not
No.
looking for the one way. It's
No.
like,
And also different people have to do different works anyway. I mean, there are these different roles that need to be played. But it was also this beautiful thing to be said about music. I found, I mean, it's so, I don't know, it's just so wonderful how he says, you know, maybe music can be the soundtrack to a revolution, maybe it can inspire the revolution, but it isn't in itself.
But yeah, that parallels so well with another moment in the work where the same person, I believe, is working through this thing of like, no, this isn't politics, it's anger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but you know, anger often prefigures politics.
Absolutely.
Right? Or politics prefigures anger. So maybe it is in the same way that, you know, that music is too. And it's like there are all of these strands that come together and form a politics or facilitate a politics.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why I was thinking through this Kronchong music being, let's say, we would much easier recognize it as political when it was emancipatory, when it had this like, oh, people can now finally express themselves in their own way. And it was actually very much put down at the time because it was not pure. It was not pure Indonesian, it was not pure Western, it wasn't pure. And that is also part of my theme. I think it's interesting to think about like this. Of course, nothing, we know so well, nothing is pure, you know, but there is still this white supremacy very much around, that there is a certain thing that is more pure than another thing, no? And anyway, I think in the conversation that is very current, this is a problem of this impurity and gray zones and gray areas of how things have come to exist and what how they have lived and how they have been living through forms of humiliation and power, because I think also there's something about humiliation and power, like both. And that's very, very difficult and complex too, but I am willing to kind of do something with it and go through. I don't know yet. I mean, I have a few, of course, a few things are on their way, and but that's why I don't want to say too much. But it's going to be.
But music will be a part of it. We know that.
But music will be a part of it because I think it's also a possibility. It's a possibility to channel things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and just this moment of performance is always an opportunity to live out certain things from the past, from your own identity, from your own history. It's like this moment too. It's like performance is always a kind of reenactment.
Yeah, that's also true. Although I don't think I'll approach it in this way. But anyway, I mean, I'm it's been a very funny and difficult process also because, of course, as you know, the exhibition was postponed. So a process that was in an incredible pressure cooker, which has its own dynamic of getting to somewhere. Yeah. When you're making something under these kind of conditions, they will get somewhere, but it's a particular modus. And then that was like cut. And then you sort of go, oh, wow, great, actually, because I didn't really want to be in that pressure.
Yeah.
So I could rethink things, but then it went really slow.
Yeah, of course. It's always a trap, right? So you get the pressure is what creates things, and it feels great to have it released, but then everything disperses.
yeah, that as well. And there were so many other issues at stake, and you're like, what's the relevance of my thoughts at the moment? It's nothing, like it was all this kind of thing. And I think many people were dealing with that because it was not a normal time.
And it's like, I feel like at least my brain and many people's brains are like, we're kind of just scanning all the time for what is relevant, what should we be doing right now, what is the how can we be ready?
Yeah, totally. No, it's so much part of it. And indeed, I've been reading in a very unconcentrated, reading a lot, and then you go, oh, no, you kind of also go all over the place trying to find your sources, trying to find your ground somehow within and I think reading became a massive activity because of, otherwise I also realized that in these, I'm normally much more developing thought in connection to people, like in connection to conversation, and this fell away for really months in the same way. Of course I had conversations, but not in the way that you have them, how do you say that they pass by, like not meant, not so steered.
Yeah, just a casual.
Yeah. I mean, this is so much part of our lives. We meet people in our situations where we work, and also I go often into things because of, wanting to kind of find out, but then you do it in this casual, indeed, conversational way, and that teaches me always so much, and it guides me into the work. And that not being there, I was scattered, looking for other ways.
If we were already in an echo chamber in the sort of realm of the art that we do, it's like maybe at the moment it might be even increasing in this way, right?
Yeah, maybe it was that, but it was interesting how even it was a moment the last weeks when things opened up a bit more here in Berlin, and I started to meet more friends, even if I had been in touch with them, but we started to meet more in a way that, and everybody was hungry for exchanging information. Like, where do you get your information from? How do you read the news? Which channels do you use? And it was very funny how everybody had been trying to find their ground, and yet we didn't all have the same sources.
Yeah.
And to exchange that was actually very helpful, because it then suddenly became richer again. It became more like, oh yeah, there's more. Very interesting.
Yeah, I really feel like I'm creating more so than ever before. Like I really have, because of how I consume media, which is mostly through Twitter in these urgent moments, I'm really creating a very singular reality for myself.
Yeah, right.
Which isn't a particularly pleasant one either, but at least incredibly informed.
Yeah, and raw, no? It's a raw information.
The unfiltered information. But so I hope that the chance for us to disperse and be social in different in myriad ways, because we're not just going to be social, we're not going to return, right? We know this. But to at least add different ways to be social again will provide some strength.
But I think also, I mean, maybe it's also, I don't know if but just to think about what's happening with all the protests and this kind of incredible upsurge. But what I find, again, beautiful, I mean, it's maybe a stupid word to use, but what I find beautiful is that you do suddenly feel that there are international connections again. There is an internationalism here that we haven't felt for a while. And I feel that's what I want to hold on to. Because indeed, in a time where everything else is suggesting that everything is going back to nationalisms, because this is also a reality in Europe, that the borders are all closed, and we are like everybody thinking about this little island of society.
Yeah,
that's going to be another struggle that probably we'll have to fight as well. But in this particular anti-racist struggle that is so burning, there you feel the lines very strong. I mean, I'm really happy to see that, and that it isn't only like, oh, we're all in solidarity with the US situation. No, it's about the Netherlands. It's about what is going on here. And I think that's that kind of, but it's with the same notions we need to deal with.
Yeah, I think there's something, I'm guessing it's something to do with just the whatever remaining power that the US has, the kind of hold that the US still has on so much of the world, that if this were something that were happening, elsewhere, anywhere else, it would still be, there would be maybe some manifestations, but it would be, in support of that. But there's suddenly this moment where, at least in the Dutch context that I've seen, it's really a moment for self-reflection. It's really a moment to push what's happening locally. That might also be influenced by the fact that over the last few months, as borders have been closing and people have been traveling less and trying to support more locally, people that is on people's minds too. That there is this kind of return to like the hyper local.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but this is also, I mean, it's going to be a really interesting subject, because the local and the national doesn't need to be the same. Let's say, sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like how to deal with that.
Yeah,
I think
not.
No, hopefully not.
Yeah,
but it's always been important. I think the local and then the connections. But now it is more clear and more available, as you say, because we're not constantly, I'm not constantly flying away and moving around.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the UK as well. I mean, the UK was also, the protests there were totally about UK. And that makes so much sense, of course, because that's, yeah. But anyway, I don't know. And of course, we can also say something against it, because why is it that the US has such a huge influence on our on our way? I mean, this is very imperial, but
yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah, I did appreciate at least that, calling out, saying that, calling out the names of those who have been murdered, or some percentage of them, but while also, and then in the next breath, talking about, in this case, orthopedic, or, it's like, okay,
that's really makes
something.
sense. It's really something. Yeah, exactly. I'm really happy about that.
So, shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, it sounds like we're coming to an end, no?
Yeah.
Feels like it. But that's great. Yeah, why not?
Thanks so much for participating in this first edition. The idea is to keep doing these somewhere around once a month, as we move through different focuses. In a sense, every focus we do is kind of the same focus, which is like how to be together now, how to do politics now. There's a kind of technical solidarity around all of it, but the idea is that we keep working through different versions and hear from different artists and practitioners on these things. So
I'm looking
so much
forward to the others. Yeah.
For taking the plunge and doing the first one with us.
No, it was a pleasure. So